Buenos días. Tenemos el agrado de tener con nosotros al señor James Smith, que viene de un organismo que está cobrando mucha importancia, Carbon Trust, de Inglaterra. Es un organismo que tiene un trabajo de asesoría a diferentes tipos de actividades de gobierno, actividades privadas, orientados a reducir el consumo del carbón. Para el Colef y para el Departamento de Estudios Urbanos en particular es un honor tenerlo, Mr. Smith, y espero que su estadía en Tijuana sea placentera.
Muchas gracias.
Muy bien. Gabriela.
Bueno, pues bienvenido, welcome to el Colegio de la Frontera Norte. We are delighted to have you here. And I'm presuming that everybody, a lot of people that are not here are following your talk through the internet. We have online and real time this presentation at the Colef website. And to start, I would like to introduce about the Fondo de Sustentabilidad Energética. Bien, le estaba dando la bienvenida al doctor y le digo que, bueno, que no se desanime si ven poquitos aquí, que seguramente mucha gente nos está siguiendo por el internet. Voy a tomar unos 10 minutos para hablar de el Fondo de Sustentabilidad Energética Europa. ¿Cuál es la relación que existe entre este programa de la Secretaría de Energía de la CENER y el Carbon Trust? Es que el UK Carbon Trust consiguió fondos para apoyar este fondo y bueno, me pidieron que lo presentara, así que voy a tomar solo 5 minutos, 10 minutes. Quisiera decir también que quien esté interesado puede tener esta presentación. Están los contactos al final de la presentación y bueno, los invitamos a que soliciten, participen en este evento. Se encuentra enmarcado en el programa de formación de recursos humanos en materia energética. Este es el documento que fue liberado hace como un año. ¿Y de dónde surge? La justificación es que con esta reforma energética se estima que México necesita formar un número mínimo de expertos en alto nivel, profesionales y técnicos en diferentes especialidades, ¿no?, en los próximos 4 años para cubrir esta demanda. Quiero expresar que en este momento el fondo tiene como una ronda. Se ha puesto gran énfasis en las profesiones y técnicas, ciencias duras, pero se está vislumbrando que cosas como las que se hacen en Maya, de gestión, de administración, de impactos sociales, de sustentabilidad, de demanda por crecimiento poblacional, todas estas cosas se van a volver importantes. Entonces, por favor, también conocen a sus amigos. Luis, gusto en tenerte aquí. Lo que se quiere es aprovechar y potenciar la formación del talento, ¿no?, para que pueda incidir en el desarrollo del sistema energético. Con la reforma energética, pues se está pensando que necesitaremos más técnicos y menos profesionales, lo que hablábamos de estos de 135,000 especialistas, un 80% de personal técnico, carreras vocacionales y un 20% de nivel superior y posgrado. Con lo que estamos cubriendo, con lo que tenemos, la oferta que tenemos educativa en México relativa o que podría tener impacto es mucho mayor y sin embargo no se está solicitando. La convocatoria está abierta de 2015 a 2016, es esta formación de recursos humanos especializados en materia de sustentabilidad energética. Está abierta. Hay otro programa de estancias doctorales, tal vez ustedes no lo tengan, pero Tito, las personas que pudiesen tener interés en nuestro departamento. El corte es el 22 de abril y hay proyectos postdoctorales, esta es la tercera modalidad, mexicanos en sostenibilidad energética. Los cortes son trimestrales, el próximo corte es el 29 de abril. Más o menos en estas tres modalidades las características que tendríamos son estas que se dan aquí. Insisto, puedo compartirles en PDF la presentación con los requisitos y la cobertura, qué es lo que se está ofreciendo, no solamente en Europa, ni siquiera en el Reino Unido, sino en todo el mundo, en tanto y cubra las condiciones de CONACYT, del Fondo de Sustentabilidad Energética. Entonces ahí está, la modalidad internacional y nacional. ¿Quién puede participar? Bueno, en el de postdoctorado cualquier doctor de nacional mexicana que haya sido aceptado para realizar la estancia postdoctoral en cualquier universidad de prestigio internacional. Y lo que se busca es que perfeccione sus capacidades de investigación en esas instituciones y que regrese a México a aplicarlas. ¿Y cómo se puede participar? Pues enviando una propuesta, ¿no? Aquí están las vigencias y lo que debe incluir son 3 años y el monto. Esto lo estoy presentando on behalf de Nelson Mojarro. Ahí está su correo electrónico, es del Fondo de Sustentabilidad Energética Europa. Y bueno, escríbanle, pónganse en contacto, seguramente va a haber alguna oportunidad. Bueno, no tengo nada más que decir, estoy atenta a sus preguntas, pero sobre todo a compartir la información. Esto también es válido para las personas que nos están siguiendo a través del internet. Y sin más que decir, le doy la palabra al doctor Smith. Muchísimas gracias.
¿Es mi hora?
Sí.
My time is ok. Sí, ok. Damas y caballeros, buenos días. Y muchas gracias por la oportunidad de discutir con ustedes la energía y el cambio climático. Estoy muy agradecido de Colef y CENER por la invitación. Recientemente he estado tratando de aprender español. Esto no es solo porque estoy un gran aficionado al juego de Rafael Nadal. También estoy interesado en el mundo de habla española. Pero confieso que ya he utilizado todas las palabras en mi vocabulario español. Y también pienso que ustedes hablan inglés mucho mejor de lo que yo hablo español. Así que espero que no les importe si continúo en inglés, por favor. ¿Vale?
Vale. Allow me to interrupt for a moment, so our colleague can show your biography to our students.
All right.
Carlos.
Muy bien. Bueno, realmente es sin duda un currículum que debe tener el señor James Smith muy amplio. Aquí nos presentan una síntesis muy breve de su currículum. Él es el director de la Carbon Trust y es asesor principal del Instituto Grantham, y también pertenece a la London School of Economics y al Colegio Imperial, al Imperial College, con respecto al cambio climático. Él ha trabajado desde hace algunos años como asesor dentro de la compañía Shell en el Reino Unido. Desde 1983 ha tenido estancias en muchos países, entre ellos Malasia y Brunei, y también trabaja con respecto a como asesor de la Shell en los países del Medio Oriente, y también dentro del Departamento de Químicos de la compañía Shell. Pues muy bien, es de una manera bastante breve presentar su amplio currículum, pero bueno, nos da gusto tenerlo aquí. Muchas gracias.
Gracias. Okay. Well, la pregunta. How do we get the energy we need for the carbon emissions the planet can afford? I guess you folks are interested in that kind of question, otherwise maybe you would be somewhere else. So I assume that you're interested in studying in this area. I could have written the question another way and said, can we get the energy we need for the carbon emissions the planet can afford? And in summary, my answer is podemos, which is a well-used word in the United States by the president when he was trying to get himself appointed. Yes, we can, for his first term. And of course, in Spain, that word has got into political circles as well. So my answer to the question is, yes, we can. And I suppose the question is, but will we? So that's what I would like to explore with you today. Let's see if I can press the middle one.
Another one.
That one. Okay. Okay, so I thought I would just do an advertisement for the Carbon Trust, if you will allow me, very, very brief. So the Carbon Trust, the goal of the Carbon Trust, of which I'm the chair, is to help accelerate the move to a low carbon sustainable economy. And we're only about 160 people, so it's not a large organization. We like to think we are reasonably expert. We like to think that we are rigorous, we're fact-based, we're logical, we're not very emotional apart from the mission, but we try to take a very realistic view about things. And for our clients, and there are many clients around the world, whether it's in business or in government, central government, regional government, there are three kinds of things that we can do. We can provide advice on strategies and policies. We can do footprinting to work out if, how much carbon is embedded in my Samsung tablet. So Samsung is one of our clients, and they're very interested to track through to see the carbon content, because ultimately, as there's more of a price in carbon and more concern, the company that has less embedded carbon in its product ought to have some kind of a competitive advantage. So they want to be able to measure that. So the Carbon Trust can help people doing that. We've been practicing that for a long time. And then the third thing is about technologies, trying to help people with low carbon technologies and energy efficient technologies. And we've been doing that for quite a long time as well. On virtually any kind of low carbon energy technology that you can imagine, we've been trying to work on that. So that's just my little advertisement for the Carbon Trust. I guess you're here because you're worried about climate change, but I thought I would just put something up there because occasionally people said, yeah, but will it, is it proven? Are we sure? Will it be that bad? Maybe we'll muddle through, maybe it'll be okay. You're talking about major changes. Are we sure of the problem in the first place? And I guess my answer is, well, if we're scientists, if we take a scientific view, then you need a theory and you need an experiment. And the theory is pretty clear. If you put more carbon dioxide, the atmosphere will tend to warm up. But people say, yes, but other things might happen. You can't be sure. And then I say, okay, well, we'll have to run the experiment. Do you want me to run the experiment of putting 35 billion tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere for another 50 years? Because I think that's an experiment we dare not run. It's like at CERN in Switzerland, don't stand inside the cyclotron and ask them to switch it on. The consequences may be very dangerous. I think in climate change, there is no muddle through option. The climate does not have a reset button. We can't run the experiment, discover we create the damage, and just hit the reset button and say, okay, we didn't mean it. Can we go back and start again? That's not possible. So I think it's a very risky thing to assume that there won't be a problem. The problem is potentially major, and the need for action is urgent. And let me explain why this is. What we've got here, I don't know if the notion of the carbon intensity of economies means anything to you. So essentially, how much carbon dioxide comes from a unit of economic activity. So you can divide the carbon dioxide emissions by the gross domestic product, GDP, of a country or of the world. And at the moment, it's the carbon intensity of the economy. It's about 400 or so tons of carbon dioxide per $1 million of GDP, of gross domestic product. And naturally, that number tends to come down, which is a good thing, because as economies mature and become more service, less industrial, and become more efficient, maybe more gas, less coal, naturally that line goes down, which is what you're seeing on the left-hand side there, but only 0.7% per annum. It's not enough, and if we keep going on the dotted red line there, by about 2030, mid-2030s or so, we'll have used up our carbon budget. We'll have put so much carbon dioxide into the atmosphere over the last 350 years, give or take, that the warming will be too great and we will blow the budget and we'll get over 2 degrees centigrade. So actually, although it might seem a little while away, we haven't got too much time left. And actually, if we're to avoid the problems of climate change, we have to change radically the shape of that line, and we have to start reducing the carbon intensity of economies by 6% per annum, which is a very significant change, as you can see. And maybe if you're wondering, well, how bad is it? Haven't we got a bit of time? I just reading the other day, a piece of research was produced from some academics in Oxford in England. I happen to know the economist who did the work. And what he said was, and his colleagues, if we build any more fossil fuel, coal or gas-based electricity generating plants in the world next year, we will already have created so much infrastructure that produces carbon dioxide that we will have burst the budget. So if we don't take action next year, we will already have built into the infrastructure a system that will generate too much carbon dioxide. And our options are either not to build that plant and therefore we don't get the energy, or to build them with something called carbon capture and storage that you may know something about, or to close down the plants early, which is an economic waste. We build them and then before they're finished, we close them down. That wouldn't be economically sensible. Or we get carbon negative technologies at some time, or we say, well, it doesn't matter, we won't bother with 2 degrees centigrade. So already the challenges of this are very, very stark. This is an extremely urgent problem. When you think about how you solve problems, you've got to think of the nature of the problem. This isn't a long-term grumbling problem. It's a problem that's not hurting us badly now, but it's a problem that soon will hurt us very badly, and it's very urgent that we take some action. And I want to explain a bit more of that as well. So what do you do? Well, there are two things if you want to reduce the carbon intensity of the economy. You have two big levers. One is energy efficiency, so to get more out for less energy in. And the other is carbon intensity, meaning when you produce the energy, you produce less carbon. So you've got to pull on those two levers, and actually you've got to get along. So we've got to reduce the carbon intensity of economies by an order of magnitude, a factor of 10 in the first half of this century. By 2050, it's got to be 1/10 what it was in 2000 or so, meaning we've got to be 3 times as energy efficient, and we've got to produce 1/3 the carbon dioxide from a given amount of energy than we did at the beginning. So a third of a third is getting on a third and a bit. A third of a bit is getting on for a 10th. But these are huge changes. So that's the arithmetic of tackling climate change. And there's another way of looking at it. On the right-hand side there, by 2050, it means the amount of carbon dioxide, if you divide the carbon dioxide we can afford, the planet can afford, by the number of people in the world, it's going to be about 1.7 tons. Today, in America, it's about 10 times that. In Mexico, it's about 2.5 times that. In China, similarly, maybe 3 times that. So we get to get from a position today where it's somewhere 18 tons per person, 5 tons, down to 1.7 tons per person. So maybe that demonstrates the scale of change. You may be looking at me saying, but you just flew over from London, and we know when you fly that you burn carbon emissions. So my return flight, London, Mexico City, is 3.76 tons of carbon dioxide, which is more than twice what will be allowed in 2050. So in 2050, I won't be allowed to come to see you. if we're going to be able to hold to our carbon budgets, or we need another way of finding fuel for the planes. And my wife came with me, so it's actually 7.5 tons. By the way, I spent some money to grow some trees in Scotland to try to compensate. There's a charity in Scotland. I gave them some money, saying, grow some trees, please. But then we say, so what are we going to do about this? And I don't know if you get into conversations, well, you know, we need to stop fossil fuels tomorrow. Well, it needs to be all renewable. Well, we've got to change our lifestyles. Well, it's true. And there are many ideas, but I think it's very important we sort of clear about the exam question. And I think it's an exam question in 4 parts. How do we get the energy we need? Because energy helps people's lives, there's no question. Energy lifts us out of poverty. We need to use it efficiently. We have to avoid dangerous climate change, so that's the second part. We've got to do it at least cost. You'll see later on, some people say, yeah, but it's a moral issue, it doesn't matter what it costs. Well, if we can achieve it one way for half the cost of doing it another way, well, why wouldn't you do it in the least cost way and use the money you save for other good things like education and health? So although it's affordable, I hope I can demonstrate it's not trivial. So I think we've got to be very cost conscious about how we do it so that people will accept it's being done, and with a high likelihood of success. As I was saying, this is a very dangerous problem, a problem that's very urgent and potentially very serious. So if we say, well, let's do it this way, we've got to believe that we're likely to be successful. Because someone says, no, I've got a better idea. We should wait for a miracle in low carbon energy for another 15 years. That would be great if it works. But if it doesn't work, we've got no time to spare. So we've got to say to ourselves, what we do here, are we likely to be successful? Because we get one shot, just one shot to fix this problem. Now, so you have to think of this in system terms because it's a big system. A complicated diagram. I'm not going to spend too much time on the detail, but if people who work in this field have seen these diagrams, it's a way of thinking about the energy system. And if you can think about it and understand it, then you know how to change it. If you look on the right-hand side, where does all the energy go? And conceptually, you can think of 3 main areas. The one at the bottom is transport. So the fuels that go into our planes and cars and buses and lorries and trains. And then industry. Industry uses a lot of energy. All the industry uses energy. High energy intensive industries like cement and glass and chemicals and refining and metals, they use huge amounts of energy. And then in all our buildings, for the appliances in our buildings and to heat and cool our buildings, although I know you're very efficient in Mexico when it comes to not using too much energy in your buildings. But these are the 3 big categories, and you've got to think about how I can do it. Sometimes people say, this is all about getting electricity without any carbon. But actually, that only is about 1/3 of the problem. If we only solve that, there's another 2/3 of the problem we still have to solve. And then you say, so where's all this energy coming from? Well, on the left-hand side are the primary energy sources. And you can see by the thickness of the charts that most of it is from fossil fuels. And this is only 2014, from oil, coal, and gas, some biomass, some nuclear, and quite small amounts of wind and solar. And then that energy gets converted in various ways, like electricity generation, refineries, biofuel plants. And then it's sent along to carry energy through to these end users, carrying it as electricity, carrying it as gas, and carrying it as fuels. So how do you take a huge system like this and decarbonize it cost effectively with a high likelihood of success by 90% in the first half of this century? And that's really what I want to talk about, how you think about that and how you make it happen. There are 3 pillars. One I've talked about is energy efficiency. Again, this is a way of thinking about it. Someone else could say, no, I think about it differently. But I think this is a good way of thinking it. I'm going to talk more about a United Nations program on this. And they use these 3 pillars. So I think it's a fairly good conceptual way. And as you notice on the left-hand side, it's a compact fluorescent rather than an LED light. So it would be better starting with incandescent and going to LED. But in every nook, corner, and cranny, whether it's our own lives, whether it's in transport, industry, we've got to make things much more energy efficient. And then electricity, those things like transport and heat that use fossil fuels at the moment at the end point, gas coming out the tailpipe, can we generate more electricity and use that for our industry and for our transport? Because electricity doesn't have any carbon. Once it's made, there's no associate. You might burn carbon in the making of it, but once you've made the electricity is a carbon-free energy carrier. And then the other thing is switching fuels. So as I say, for heating and for transport, instead of using fossil fuels, using electricity, for example, or hydrogen, using biofuels, switching as well, less coal, more gas, because gas generally is more efficient and uses less, it generates less carbon dioxide than coal does, and renewable forms of heat, which may also be biosources. So these are the three big pillars that people think about. And then what I want to get you interested in, if I can, is modeling the system, energy systems modeling. So when people make qualitative statements, it would be nice if we could do the following, or batteries would make a big difference. You say, okay, well, let's build a model of the energy system and let's see what's really important. Let's try and optimize this because it's a big system. We need to understand it so we can change it properly. And into your model goes pictures of what you expect demand should be, and that's driven by economic growth, but you also want to try and shift demand if you can, encourage people to use less, use it at different times. Supply, which is the sources of primary energy and the conversion, and then some goals. So you put those into your model, and then you run this optimization to get enough energy, rapid reduction in emissions, do it at the least cost and with a high likelihood of success. And then on the right-hand side are the various outputs you get from the model. There are pathways. So how do we get from where we are to where we, how do we optimize these pathways? What do we look at? There's not one pathway. I'm not suggesting this is a kind of deterministic model where there's only one answer. And how can we know only one answer when we don't have all the information? We're trying to look into the future. But there may also be points on critical path. You know, we'd better get this done by, and I'm going to talk about 2025 for Mexico in a few minutes. We'd better get something done by 2025 or we won't be there in time. And when we have to make those sort of decisions, we might not yet have all the information. And then the middle one on the right-hand side, systems values of technologies. So which are the really valuable technologies that without them are going to cost more? And when you model, you can say, well, let's run the model with this technology and then run it without. Do we find the cost goes up or goes down? So we want to find those valuable technologies and see that those are the ones that are important to us. We have to manage options, so we can't be sure. So we try to keep options on technology open for as long as we can so that we can mature them and get the best comparison. That tells us how to deploy our research and development. And then we've got to think about policies. So we advise governments and regulators, so if we want these things to happen, what are the best market-driven policies that are available? Some policies can be very productive. Some, if we're careless, might be counterproductive. So that's what we can get from our models. And then the difficulty of these models, so behind it, so what are we trying to deal with? I'm just taking a couple of examples. This is Texas, yes. In a week in early March 2015, you say, why a week in early March 2015? Well, this is at the bottom there, the source, can you see, is United Nations Deep Decarbonization Pathways Project, which I think is, I commend it to you. So I hope at the end of this, I persuade you to read these reports and look at the Deep Decarbonization Pathways Project. But I've just taken this little snapshot. And one thing, this is a week, and one thing you can see that demand is very peaky. So there's a big demand in the middle of the day and it falls away. Well, what's the conclusion of that? Well, that's expensive because it's like rush hour traffic. You know, you need lots of buses in the rush hour, and then when it's not rush hour, the buses are kind of idle. Well, it's the same with electricity. You have to meet the rush hour demand, so you build a lot of capacity, and then when there's less demand in the rest of the day, the capacity's lying idle. So how do you, it would be nice if you could reduce these peaks so you have less infrastructure, which means less cost. That's one of the things you try to think about. And then you might notice that the wind is that blue bit at the top. It's blowing in the middle of the week, but it's not blowing at the end of the week. So you've got to build enough gas plants in this case to ensure when the wind doesn't blow, you can still satisfy demand. Now, if you already build the gas plant, it's there on the other days as well. So actually for the wind to be cost effective, it's got to be cheaper than the marginal cost of running the gas plant. Not just cheaper than the gas plant, but cheaper than the marginal cost of using the gas in the gas plant in the middle of the week. So you've got to think about those things if you want to make it cost optimal. And here's another one about California, some big infrastructure decisions that they may have to make. We need to turn the vehicles, the cars, into low carbon vehicles. Now, how can we do that? Well, maybe battery vehicles, maybe hydrogen fuel cells. Well, do we know enough about the technology yet? Well, no. So on the left-hand side, the top box assumes there are both battery vehicles and hydrogen fuel cells. The bottom box on the left says, no, the hydrogen fuel cells don't come through, so we've only got electric vehicles. Well, the infrastructure consequences are huge, because on the right-hand side, you can see that if you're going to charge electric vehicles, you need 7,000 megawatts, and you need to hydrolyze hydrogen, and you need hydrogen filling stations. But below that, if there aren't any hydrogen vehicles, then you need much more electricity generation for more battery cars, but you don't need the electrolysis of the hydrogen. And these are very, very big choices that you have to make, the answer to which you don't know yet. And it's not just a technological issue, it's also an issue about who gets to decide, where are the institutions and where are the regulations and policies that enables those proper choices to be made at the right time. So these are the challenges that modelers have. Now, the United Nations Deep Decarbonisation Pathways Project is something that has been put together in the last few years, and teams in 16 countries have worked on running the models for their countries to see how they can achieve these goals. So, and if you add up all these countries, Mexico is one, the United States, Canada, European countries, Russia, China, India, Australia, 16 countries, comes to about 75% of the global emissions. So if you can see how it can work for them, you can get an answer. And the value of this is you have a standardized approach for all of the countries. So you start with some assumptions, and this is a report from Mexico that I commend to you to read. So how many more people will there be by the middle of the century, and how big will the economy be? So they think there'll be 30% more people, 150 million people, and that rather than $8,000 a year or so of unit GDP, it will be more like $20,000 a year by the middle of the century, which means the economy will be something like $3 trillion compared to just less than $1 trillion today. So a growth of 3.3. You say, really? You know, we're not really growing very fast at the moment. And I think around the world people say, really? But you know, we have had these levels of growth, and there's plenty of opportunity in Mexico for the economy to grow. And it would be sad if we say we don't need to worry about climate change because the economy won't grow. I mean, that would be kind of defeatist. So we've got to believe we can be economically successful and then think about the consequences for managing the climate. So these are big drivers, fundamental drivers. And they run the models, and here's the what they came up with. So I commend the book. So primary energy, or final energy use, it's expected, despite the economy being more than 3 times as large in total, primary energy use only going up by 40%, although 40% is a lot of growth. Renewables would have grown by 7.5 times, meeting 35% of the total demand. I'll show you a little bit more about that in a moment. Oil, because that means a lot of CO2 coming out of the pipelines and cars, would have gone down by 68%, by 2/3. Gas would have increased, doubled, and would meet half of demand. And something called carbon capture and storage, I don't know how much you know about that, would meet 27% of demand. But on the right-hand side, you can see that electricity, which is the blue there, would have increased by a factor of 4 times. So there'd be far more electricity. And as I say, the benefit of electricity is it's low carbon when you eventually use it. It would be 40% of the total, and from about 14% today. And again, gas would have doubled, but liquids would be down lower. So that's a very, very substantial change. There's the electricity system on the left, so you can see that coal virtually disappears, carbon capture and storage with the gas, and a huge growth in solar energy. And you notice that electricity is nearly 4 times by 2050 what it is in 2010. So even though the total energy is only gone up by 40%, electricity has gone up by far more because we want more electricity in the total system. On the right-hand side is transport, and you can see the number of cars is actually leveling out, and it's assumed that nearly half of those will be electric cars. And the greater growth is in buses, of which a fifth will be electric, and then trains, where there'll be a lot of electric use as well. Now, if you read the report, you'll see that they say it's not just enough to have electric cars, modal change. People have to get out of their cars and onto the buses and the trains, otherwise the system won't be able to cope. And if you want that to happen, you've got a lot of planning and infrastructure. It's got to be attractive to people for people to do it. and the buses and the system have to be there to enable it. So there's a lot of forward thinking to make that possible. And then the other sectors, remember that diagram where I talked about industry and buildings and transport? All of them are showing, the black line at the top is the carbon intensity of the energy, and you can see in all cases, each source of energy is becoming much less carbon intensive for those sectors. Industry, because of economic growth, will need more energy, but you can see a huge growth in the blue in electricity. Similarly for buildings, and you can see actually that the amount of energy used in transport is going down, and the amount of fossil fuels used in transport is going down a lot, and coming in are biofuels and electricity. So again, that is a massive change. What is that? That was a very quick summary of a very interesting report that I commend to you. What does it mean in total? Because I talked about 90% decarbonisation, and what they achieved by this calculation was 86%, which is pretty good. Energy efficiency has improved by nearly 60%, and electricity has improved by 97%, which is a tremendous change, and much more electricity in the system. On the right-hand side, the carbon emissions today, or in 2010, were about 500 million tonnes a year, 504. By the middle of the century, they've got down to about 240 or so million tonnes, which is just over 50% reduction. Had nothing happened, the carbon emissions would have increased to about 980 million tonnes. So they'd have increased by 80% or so, rather than decreasing by 50%. So that's a phenomenal change to the system. And I said earlier that time isn't on our side, because if you read the report, well, this is sort of engineering, technological, mechanical, and it says we can do it. The question is, will we do it? And what the report emphasizes, this can be done, but we're really, really short of time, because we have major decisions to make, new regulations to put in place, infrastructure to be built, some crucial decisions about will this work or not, carbon capture and storage being a crucial one. And what the report says, we've got the next 5 years only, between now and 2020, to think this through more fully, to take the work that's been done, analyse and understand a bit more, test it a bit more. Then another 5 years to think about the institutions and the regulations and the policies and the technologies. And by 2025, we better hit the ground running, and actually have done quite a lot before then. So this isn't, although we're talking about what we achieve by 2050, we have a huge amount to do over the next 10 years if we're going to achieve that at all. So there are some monumental decisions, and that's not just Mexico. I know in the UK it's exactly the same thing. So when we talk about the critical path, we're on the critical path now about some crucial decisions on big infrastructure. You might be wondering about other countries. This is just a quick summary on the United States. So their GDP will only be 2.44 times what it is today by the middle of the century. Not like Mexico, 3.3 times. Your population grows a bit more, and there's more scope for economic growth. But nonetheless, that's big, and it's about 40 trillion, the American economy. They reckon by the middle of the century. Because their economy is a bit more mature, they will actually use less energy by the middle of the century, if we're going to achieve this. But similar sort of growth, huge growth in renewables, 7 times. Oil was down, what did I say, 66% for Mexico. It's down 88% for the United States. Gas is down, but there's still a lot of gas in the system, meeting 30% of needs. There's still a lot of carbon capture and storage needed. And fossil fuels, believe it or not, by 2050, on the left-hand side there, are still nearly half of the total energy. And similarly to Mexico, on the right-hand side, electricity has grown hugely, and electricity is half the total end-use energy. So again, these are very, very major changes. If you look at the top, though, carbon dioxide is down by, you can't see it, I haven't got a chart for it, but on the headline, carbon dioxide will have fallen 86%. And the carbon intensity of the economy, is the carbon dioxide per unit GDP, will be down by over 90%. So that would be a huge achievement. I'm not saying it will happen, I'm saying the technologies are there to make it possible for it to happen. And some of the things behind it, though, are quite extraordinary. There's a really good report in the United States, and the same thing, UN Deep Decarbonization Pathways Project. There's a policy report and there's some scenarios. And this is a snapshot from one of them. This is cars. And at the moment we've got gasoline and diesel cars, and then these things called hybrids, which are, you've got a small gasoline engine, but you've got a battery in there. And then the one at the top are only batteries, like the new Tesla Model 3 that's coming out today, and you all want to buy one of those, I'm sure. But the assumption behind this, so there are standardized assumptions, as I say, is that if you see it, the number of, on the left is the annual sales, and on the right is, so how many cars are there actually in use? So the annual sales, it's a phenomenal change. It is assumed that hybrid cars and battery cars will be mature in 4 or 5 years' time, meaning that that will be the maximum point for sale of conventional cars as we know them. And then they will decline over the following 15 years to virtually nothing. And hybrid cars and battery cars will make up the difference. That's a really profound assumption, and it underlies what I was showing. The question is, at the bottom there, consumer acceptance of this will be crucial. Because if the consumers don't want to buy those cars because they don't believe they're as effective or they're too expensive, then it won't happen and we won't meet the carbon limits. I think that's also true for some things like heat pumps, where they're going to be important as well. So that's a potentially very big change. I showed you the diagram in 2014 of the US energy system, and you can see here in 2050, that same diagram, but very, very different. On the right-hand side, I don't know if you can remember the thickness of the bars, but the amount of energy used is diminished. On the left-hand side, that's where the most profound changes are. Coal has disappeared, oil is way down, but there's still a lot of gas, because gas can be used to make electricity, and gas can also be used in industry, but biomass has increased. A lot of the renewables in the United States in this are biomass. Nuclear's risen, but so have other renewables, and it's particularly wind in the United States. There's an interesting contrast if you look at the two reports. In the United States, it's more wind and less solar. In Mexico, it's much more solar and less wind, which is kind of logical given the circumstances, the huge land area you've got and the very strong sunlight that you've got. And actually, if you look behind the American report, in the West, in California, they're using relatively more solar. It's just the rest of the United States, it's more wind. So it's not surprising, perhaps, that there's the sort of difference in Mexico and the United States, in which predominates on renewable energy. Now, I don't want to confuse you and puzzle you with this, but I thought it would be interesting. This is not Texas anymore, it's the Western United States. On the bottom is the demand, and the grey area at the bottom is what we call inflexible demand. So that grey area is, that's what people really need. So can you shift the demand from peaks? You can shift it a bit in commercial side, in houses. You can bring in the charging of battery cars to fill in some of those gaps, because if you get smoother demand, that's likely to go more economic because it's easier to build the infrastructure for smoother demand. But what's actually being installed is a lot of wind and solar. So these big yellow teeth at the top that are peaking up are solar energy in the middle of the day that's being supplied from a huge amount of solar. You're saying, well, it seems to exceed the amount of demand. Well, it does. So why did we build all this solar, or what do we do now? And the wind, because if you look at it, on the left-hand side, the wind's blowing some days, but on the right-hand side, it's blowing less. That's the sort of beige, the blue picture. Well, what they do is they turn that surplus energy into hydrogen, and you can use the hydrogen elsewhere in the economy for heat, for example, and for methane. So the energy's not wasted, it's turned into another form of energy and used elsewhere in the economy. But these things are inefficient because you lose 25% or more of the energy in turning it into hydrogen and then turning it back into other forms of energy. So the reason I put it up there was just to show the complications that anyone's got in designing a system like this and matching supply and demand, because you've got a whole set of regulations and institutions on supply, another set of agents and regulations and institutions on demand. And if you want to make that whole thing work, you have to bring them together. So we don't have, in all countries, it's unusual to have the institutional framework that it will enable us to use all of that energy efficiently. So this isn't just about technology, it's about policies and institutions as well. Now, what does all this cost? Is it affordable? Well, in the United States, they did 4 scenarios. So that's at the bottom. On the left-hand side, they had a kind of mixture of all the technologies. Then they had one which was, well, let's make as much renewables as we possibly can. They call that high renewables. And then on the right-hand side, they had one called high nuclear. Let's have as much nuclear as we can. And the other, high carbon capture and storage. And their general conclusion is, well, it's affordable, by and large. You know, it's 1.5% of GDP for the high renewables, which is $600 billion a year. You know, it's not trivial. Or 0.5% if it's high renewables, high nuclear, high CCS. So roughly speaking, between 0.5% and 1.5% of GDP, as you can see, with quite some error bars between them, quite some uncertainties. But they conclude, I think reasonably, we ought to be able to afford this. And if it means 1.5% we could spend on something else, yes, but with economic growth, a year later we'll get the 1.5%. If we can get 2% economic growth, we'll have the money back a year later. So we ought to be able to afford it, but it is $400 billion a year between the two on the right-hand side and the high renewables one. Now, who can say it's exactly that? But $400 billion a year isn't a lot of money, and that's why I was saying earlier, we need to think about what it costs and the relative costs of different ways of doing it. Because you could do a lot of good with health and education with $400 billion a year. So it's crucial we make the right kind of choices cost-wise as well. I don't know numbers from Mexico. I know the guy who did the report in Mexico, and I said, what about the cost numbers? I don't think they've published them. I don't know what they are. I imagine they're going to do further work. I would guess they'd be somewhat similar, because in the United Kingdom, we come up with similar sorts of numbers. It's not surprising to see these kinds of numbers. And then what was achieved in this UN Deep Decarbonisation Pathways project? Well, emissions were down. If you add all the countries together, and you see China at the bottom, then India, then the blue one's the USA, all of the countries there, emissions are down by 45%, which is pretty good. Mind you, it's a model, it's not a reality. We've got to turn it into reality. But it's not enough. It does need to be more, but it shows that it can be done. Primary energy rises behind it. You can't see that in the chart. These are conclusions I've drawn from other parts of the report. Is up. The carbon intensity of the economy is down by 88%. So, you know, how much carbon do we get per unit GDP? That's gone down a long, long way, which is really encouraging that it can be done. Renewables have huge growth. And the electricity share in final energy has gone up by a lot. But still, perhaps to some people's surprise, in 2050, the primary energy is still 52% fossil compared to 87% or so in 2010. Renewables has grown enormously to 35 and nuclear at 13. So that's the summation of the outcome there of this deep decarbonisation project. So here are my conclusions. I think this is my second last slide. If we want to solve this problem of getting sufficient energy but avoiding dangerous climate change, there is a set of technologies available. It's a very broad set. And we can see through this work pathways to get there. It is affordable, 1% of GDP, plus or minus, although I don't suggest that number is trivial, because if it was double that, the difference could be used usefully in many other ways. But here are the questions. And I didn't know to have we the will first or last. The question is, we can do this, but will we actually do it? There's so many other things we have to do. We're confronted here with very big choices, and we do have to redeploy the funds, and we do have to convince the people, everyone, that it's necessary to do. We have left it very, very late. It's almost too late. I mean, the lock-in is already there. We will probably overshoot in the 2030s what we're allowed to put in, because it's a very big system. It's hard to turn it around. Does that mean we'll need negative carbon technologies, actually taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere? It probably does. Will consumers accept these electric vehicles and heat pumps? They need to be as good. They need to be fun. They need to be not much more expensive. That for me is a big question. It's really, really important that we get good emission-free vehicles and good emission-free heat. And we need a thoughtful energy systems plan where we use logic and facts as much as we can. And we are going to have to do a lot of work on policies, incentives, and new institutions. And can I just say, I think the Mexican government's done wonderful work. In fact, I was saying to a government minister in the UK, You ought to have a look at what they've done in Mexico, because I think their institutional framework now is better than the institutional framework in the UK. We have one person in the UK making the decision. I better be careful when I say this, you tell. But the minister in the UK makes the decisions. So an energy architect, it's the minister. I think in Mexico you've created more, sort of a more comprehensive institutional framework at the moment in order to deal with what you have to do. But I think we all recognize we're going to have to improve our institutional frameworks in the future. My final question, so my final assertion is, yes, we can, podemos. But how do we feel about it all? Are we daunted or are we invigorated? And I think I'd say we better be daunted, because if we don't get this right, the consequences will be bad, and equally it is a huge and difficult challenge. But if all we are is daunted, we'll have our heads down, and we won't have energy, and we won't work together, we won't be excited about the prospects. So much better that we feel invigorated by this tremendous challenge, the good that it will do, and the tremendous opportunities that it will create for jobs and interesting jobs doing something worthwhile. I mean, we talk about $1 trillion a year or more now to do this. It's not a meaningful number. If you convert that into people working and earning salaries, it's probably 50 million people around the world. So a team of 50 million people around the world working on this really exciting project, we can be very invigorated by that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bueno, creo que aquí va a moderar Carlos, pero y estamos recibiendo las preguntas que surjan aquí o en línea. Pueden ser en español, si no se quieren animar, las traducimos. Entonces, ¿hay preguntas? Yeah, sure, Carlos.
Thank you very much, Mr. Smith. This was really very interesting, this presentation. I didn't realize the existence of this report in the United Nations, which is really interesting. I'm in favor of the decarbonization economy in the work sense, but the problem is how to deal with the geopolitics in the real world. According with the level of investment of oil consuming from countries like USA, China, even Russia, or Arab countries, which those countries, they have a high level of investment in oil exploitation and use. So I can see that there are two paths. One is how to deal with the companies, with those international companies with very economic and profit profile they have. And with this idea of the United Nations to deal with the decarbonization policies and performance for the next 30 years. Yeah. You mentioned that from 2015, we're talking about 34 years later.
Yes.
Which is in order of economy and technology, it's a very short period, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's for me, it's like a utopic in a certain way.
Okay. Shall I try and respond to that? So you asked about geopolitics. Maybe there's three things: the geopolitics, and also large companies, and they can see that this is not all of them. Is it going to be good?
Yes.
And they've done well in the past. How are they going to play their part? And also, have we really got enough time to get this done? Given that it's not like consumer goods, it's not like mobile phones that a new model can come out and it's very, very different. It's big infrastructure. So on the geopolitics, I'm slightly more encouraged than I used to be. And I think principally because, and you know the processes of international discussion in Paris, there was a good agreement last December. It was an agreement that something needs done, which is different from saying it will be done, but that in itself I think is progress. And I think it's mainly because particularly China and the United States, the government in the United States at least, recognize that something needed to be done. And maybe in particular China recognized something needed to be done because, as you know, they have major environmental, short-term city pollution, environmental problems. And I always used to say the problem with climate change is it's a problem in the future. We're not feeling it now, so it's hard to respond to something that you think will happen, but you're not feeling. We're good at responding to immediate crises. We're not very good at responding to different problems. And I used to say we need a proxy. We need something to happen today that is like what will happen in future. I wondered once if it was the dreadful hurricanes, sad and tragic though they are. But it seems to be urban air pollution in China that's really caused the Chinese to recognize that they have to do something significant. And while they're cleaning up today's problems, probably they should fix the next problems. And I think they've also recognized that they must be much more efficient in how they use energy in order to support economic growth. So I kind of argue that in China they're quite good at long-term systems thinking. And this is a long-term systems thinking problem. So China realized it had to do something. But they also recognize that carbon dioxide doesn't have passports. So even if they do something themselves, if the rest of the world isn't going to do anything, they'll still have a problem. That's why it caused them to work together with the United States. And you know, President Obama and the President of China have had some good discussions. And it looks as if they're now going to, on the 22nd of April, China and the United States are going to be signing the Paris Agreement, and that will be wonderful. And once they started getting involved, Europe got more involved. I think Mexico has been doing a great deal as well and doing a great contribution. And they talk about the major emitting nations, which are the 16 or so. So there's a smaller group that can make it. Geopolitically, it looks as if there is a belief that the presidential elections in the United States, of course, will have it. So the geopolitics of this, I don't say are certain, but they're more favorable than they've been. The next thing I think is you talked about the big companies, and of course fossil fuel companies have done really well for 100 years. And fossil fuels, of course, have been a great benefit. I say fossil fuels are a blessing and a curse. The blessing is the phenomenal energy we've got out of fossil fuels, which have enabled us to build the modern world and all the benefits that come with it. The curse is the environmental impact. Shell, who I used to work for, first said, I think in 1997, that climate change, we put it in our annual report, was a problem that needed to be dealt with. And I know Shell in the United States supported there was a Kerry Lieberman proposal for a climate bill in the United States, and Shell wrote a letter of support for that at that time. But it will be a big change, there's no question. So it looks to me as if oil use has to diminish very significantly. And you're right, there will be competition among people who have oil as to who gets to produce the oil. But I think you've got to, well, if you stand in the way of progress, I think you'll end up in trouble. That has to be your frame of mind. And you've got to recognize while there will be changes, what is it that you as a company are good at? And you better think about developing your capabilities there. So I think Shell, for example, or the oil could do a lot in carbon capture and storage. They could do a lot in biofuels. And if there is a big hydrogen economy, then if the oil can't be used, the oil could be turned into hydrogen, and the hydrogen could be used. It's a very big change. But it's a change, so there is business for them to be done, even though it's not the same business as it is today. And I think they should focus on the opportunities that creates and the risk to their own business of ignoring it, which isn't to say it's simple. I think the other thing about being very short of time, I agree with you, and I think that's one of the big messages we have to get over. The energy system is so big, it's like a supertanker. A new source of energy takes 30 years, 10 years in the laboratory, 10 years trying it out, and then 10 years before it gets to scale. We saw that with oil and gas. We've been seeing the same with wind and solar. And one of my worries is when people say we need a miracle, and by the way, I admire Bill Gates very considerably, who seems to know a great deal about this and very sensible about it too. But if we say we need a miracle, one of the risks is that people who don't want to do anything will say, "Hey, I told you so. We have to wait for a miracle." Or other people who have their own ideas of how to do it say, "I don't like these technologies, let's wait." And I think there's a great risk in waiting. We really need to get on with the stuff that we know works. Even though a lot of these technologies aren't mature enough, and some people say they're not very attractive, there's no emotional, it's hard to fall in love with carbon capture and storage, it's hard to fall in love with nuclear, for example. But these are things that we know can be effective, and we really ought to be getting on with.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much. ¿Más preguntas? Nancy la vi escribiendo. Luis.
Comparing both economies, the U.S. and Mexico, the results were considerably more promising in the Mexico part. What are the key elements on maybe Mexican culture, Mexican economies that played role in these results?
Yeah.
In your perception?
Did you? I didn't. When you say they were better, I think the United States had a big reduction in emissions, and also I thought they were similar. Better in the.
Well, let's say in the historic view, Mexico has well, I interpret it like that way, that it's faster. Mexico's
Yes, I think so. I think the scale of change in Mexico looks like it would be bigger. I agree with that. And gosh, culture question, I'm not going to be very good at. Maybe you're better at that than I am, and I wouldn't presume to be able to answer it. But I think there are perhaps two reasons I can think of. One is that, in a sense, you have more economic opportunity than the United States, because there is more growth that you can have, and therefore maybe at the moment you've got less locked-in infrastructure. It's a bit like when in Shell we used to do scenarios comparing China with India, and because India was a bit further behind, we said actually India might be able to create a greener economy than China can, because already China's got a lot of coal-fired power plants and India hasn't got there yet in a way. So maybe there's more opportunity, there's more freedom for action within the Mexican economy than there is in the American economy, because there's more infrastructure you yet have to build. And you can build that infrastructure on the basis of things that we want to have a low carbon infrastructure, rather than, darn, what are we going to do this with this high carbon infrastructure we've already got in order to change it? That may be one reason. The other reason I'm quite struck by, I was fortunate, President Peña Nieto was in the UK last year on a state visit, and I got involved in a meeting. But some years before, President Calderon had been in the United States, and I got it, United Kingdom, and I'd been involved in a meeting there. And I asked him about renewable energy, and it was a topic that was very interesting to him. And he spent a long time responding to it. It was very good. I mean, he talked about the opportunities, he talked about specific things like more efficient fridges and a program that he'd implemented. And I tried to understand things a bit better before meeting him and asking that question. And it's very apparent the tremendous scope for renewable energy in Mexico. I mean, your country, is it 1 million square kilometers, Mexico? It's about 4 times the size of the UK and relatively close to the equator. So the opportunity, for example, for solar energy is huge. And the opportunity for wind energy is also very large as well. So I think there's also, in a sense, a natural resource advantage that you've got from renewables in Mexico. I think that feeds through in also. Although you have also considerable opportunities, it would appear, in shale gas, from what I can read, huge opportunities. And my friend here will point out we need to be careful about water with shale gas, and she's very right as well. So I think, and gas is of course the cleanest of the fossil fuels, and used in the right way can play a role there. So as well as renewable energy, I think there's a fossil fuel resource there that, if it can be developed and used in the right way, is also a potential advantage.
Thank you. Any other question? ¿Alguna otra pregunta? Peter, por favor.
Probably the main factor in the explanation of the future change in the source of energy could be the final cost to the final consumer. That means that if we can expect that this cost is not going to change a lot because cost composition or structure in companies, that means we are not going to have from the companies this will to change the use of type of source of energy. In my opinion, Maybe I am not too much optimist. I think it's going to be very difficult to change the behavior from the companies. Particularly if that costs 1% or 1 or 2% probably of the cost for the companies. And that is possible only when there is a monopoly. The monopoly can translate the cost to the final consumer, like Microsoft, for example. But in a competitive sector, it's very difficult. One company introduce the higher cost because it's going to reduce some type of consumption in energy. So I see very difficult a change in the behavior of companies, big and small companies. Particularly in a context of informal society. Maybe you don't know, but some cities in Mexico and Latin America started, half of the cities started in irregular manner. Irregular means out of the law. And also we have more than half of the working population informal.
Informal.
So we have a lot of activity, a lot of things in the informal sector. That means the government has less than half a power to impose, to enforce any regulation. So, what is the possibilities to this society with weak government to enforce any regulation? And with this incentive in the private sector to keep with the actual present structure of cost. That means actual present structure of energy consumption.
Okay, thanks. Good questions, and they are good questions because they're real and they're very difficult to answer. It's reminded me that I maybe Dr. Carlos didn't complete my answer, because I do still believe in markets and the profit motive. But as you say, if companies are driven by the profit motive, and in a sense, if we've designed companies to be driven by the profit motive, because that creates the incentive to create new products and be very efficient, provide good service, they will continue to do what they're already doing. And if that means burning fossil fuels, then we've got a problem on climate change. Now, if we say, well, forget capitalism, we won't do it that way, we'll now direct the companies, I would argue that's not the best way to do it. I do believe that competitive forces are the best way to redeploy resources. The market force, the best way to redeploy efficient resources in order to make the sort of transformation that we need. But that does mean changing when I talk about changing the terms of trade for energy, which I think, and you may find it strange, in Shell we used to advocate, we said, we need more regulation. And regulation in a whole variety of ways. Regulation of the fuels that are burned so that they're less carbon intensive, and regulation of the efficiency of appliances and of vehicles so they use less energy. But in a way, creating a level playing field. So in Shell, we used to advocate putting a price on carbon. So rather than saying voluntarily you can change your business and go bankrupt in the process because no one else will change, you need to change the rules so that the rules cause you to have to change the product so that you're less carbon intensive than you were before. And that's why I say if the rules are that you're not going to be able at some point to burn oil in cars because of the carbon dioxide, you will have the incentive to improve your research and development on fuel cells and also to produce hydrogen. If the rule is you're not allowed to have a gas-fired power station that emits carbon dioxide, you will be forced to work on carbon capture and storage, and you'll hope that your carbon capture and storage-based gas plant is cheaper than a wind plant or a solar plant. You don't know that it will be, but you'll have a big incentive to do that. Otherwise, you won't be able to sell your gas. So I think it's very important that we're able to create a new regulatory structure that incentivizes private industry to recognize that whether it's by price or regulation, we're going to decarbonize. And each company will have to look to its strengths to say, okay, in that world, what are we good at, given our starting point? And are there products that we can create within the new requirements where we think we may have competitive advantage? So the challenge, I don't think, is to stop using fossil fuels and give up on profits. It becomes a bigger challenge. How do I do well still what I'm doing today, while at the same time having the research and development and the product development to enable me to be able to operate in a much lower carbon world in the future? So, I mean, that's my general response for companies. And I think maybe this is a bit optimistic, that the sooner we start, companies should be advised to advocate that, because the sooner we start, the more they will be able to do their research and development, the more time they'll have to do it, and therefore to come with the products when they're needed. Whereas if the companies are saying, wait, and if eventually, because that's what Shell's scenario is, eventually in the 2030s, we'll all start getting serious climate shocks, and in a hurry, we'll rush in new policies and new technologies, and there's a bigger risk because of the rush of policy error and not having enough time to develop the technologies. So the enlightened companies will see that it's better for them to give themselves time to be able to develop good policy, for governments to develop good policy, and for them to do the right research and development. The power of governments, I agree. I mean, there's the actual power as you described, but I think even if the total economy if the government has its arm around the total economy, governments have to be, I think, very, very careful about telling consumers, you cannot have this. And we're going to there are 20 million gas boilers in the United Kingdom. Are we going to be able to say to the average family, sorry, you can't use a gas boiler anymore. You're going to have to use something else that may be more expensive and may not work as well. I don't think any government, even though they've got their arms around the whole economy, has that power to be able to tell people what to do. So that's why I say it's so important that we can make, in the UK's case, the heat pumps efficient and low cost and work just as well as gas boilers. Otherwise, you won't, I don't think, because if the consumer feels that this is being forced, they're going to lose their support for the act of climate change as well. It's not just they won't like the government anymore. If climate change is causing, if response to climate change means I lose out on the utility of my heating my home, then I may not be supportive of the moves to climate change. So it's not just today's government that's got a problem, it's dealing with climate change. So that's why the research and development on this is very important. Interestingly, one other thing, the United States report on this, the UN Deep Decarbonization Project, there is a policy document there. And in the scenarios, what they've done is they've said, well, for each scenario, where do the costs turn up in which sector? So the domestic sector, the commercial sector, the industrial sector. And I think you were implying, if it hits heavily on the domestic sector, the individual consumer, there may be more resistance. So you may want to choose a pathway where the costs are spread more generally in the economy. Ultimately, it will affect the consumer, of course. But if there's immediate impact on, say, your electricity bill, that's more immediate for you, and you and me may be less willing to accept that. So I think also this analysis, not just a technical engineering analysis, but the distributional analysis from an economic point of view, is going to play a role in deciding which are better pathways. I'm sorry, that's a very long and incomplete answer to a very good question.
Thank you very much. ¿Alguna otra pregunta? ¿No? ¿Seguros? ¿No tenemos nada en línea? Okay. Bueno, I was asking James if there was any other question.
Yeah.
As people are not getting very encouraged to ask anything, I will. I think that all the questions that were posed to you before, in some way, were from our point of view, from our Latin American point of view, where there's poverty, inequality, what the competence, it may not be that free of certain mechanisms where are not the problem for them to function in a, I don't want to say that, in a, let's say, a real competitive manner. And because of the culture, because of the informality in our societies, is that maybe, sorry, we keep bringing that a topic to our questions, because we are facing here sometimes that the most logical, technical way to do things is not exactly the way that is going to be done.
Yeah.
And is that because maybe we are seeing this with a bit of our concern, suspicion, although I, as Carlos, a fully supporter of decarbonizing the economy, I think that it makes more sense and it may bring more benefits than not doing it. That's one general comment, and my question is regarding the role of renewables. Because you show, and I was rather surprised to see that solar power was kind of the most important renewable source. The most important actual renewable source implemented in Mexico is wind power. It has grown an staggering 71% in 5 years, mainly in the in Oaxaca to the south of Mexico City. And yes, I do agree that we have a lot of potential to generate solar power, but it hasn't really started up. There is something that it may change how this energy mix is working to generate electricity in Mexico, because the energy reform, the recent energy reform, and just the really fresh and new options of long term in which solar power to market surprise.
Yes.
It play an important role. 72% were assigned for solar energy producers. So that it may be the mechanism for this to happen that you are projecting. But otherwise, I see it kind of difficult to achieve that. I think that maybe in the next 10, 20 years, wind power is going to become even more important than what it's actually.
Well, you may be right, because I know one of the guys who did the Mexico report, Daniel Rivera, and the other guy is Jordi Tavillo. And I had some questions for Daniel, and one of the questions was, how come there's so much solar? And he said, well, that's, when we ran them up. But Daniel is not saying, look, that's the outcome and it's fixed. He's saying this is an assessment and it's appraisal. And as everyone says about these models, we need to be careful that we don't think we're trying to create a blueprint. We're trying to analyze and see what can be done, how close we are to achieving it, what seem to be important, what are the policy implications, critical path, but not trying today to lock in and say, I know the answer on the final set. And I think, interesting, so I think if Daniel were here, I'm sure he'd say, well, let's see. It looks as if we're going to need a lot more renewable energy. It so happens the way we did the calculation and the numbers that were used, I guess, solar predominated. But frankly, the right way to use the market is to go out and test that. And as I think you were implying, we got some bids in, or Senator got some, well, it wasn't Senator, it was the electricity generating company in Mexico got some bids in the other day and found it was a world record low price for solar at $40.5 per megawatt hour, which is an extraordinarily low price. The only thing is solar doesn't work after dark, so if you're going to have storage, you're going to have relatively more storage for solar than you would for wind. But these options, as you say, have wind in them. There will be changes too. I think that wedge of solar, who knows? Let's use market forces as best we can. And the framework should be an institutional framework that uses, we've got these plans, but we want to use the private sector the best we can. And it's competitive technology development and operational effectiveness and bids like this, competitive bidding, that will tell us what's inside that huge tranche of renewables. And it may be, let's see, we'll find out. And I think on that one, in a sense, we don't need to know, we don't need to create, we need that big tranche of renewables, and we're open-minded, I think, to a degree, about how much will turn out to be solar and how much will turn out to be wind, except that to the extent the system will need storage, and therefore there is a big infrastructure question. There needs to be an institution that is monitoring where the trends are going and therefore what the storage consequences and the grid management consequences of that are.
Thank you very much. ¿Alguna otra pregunta?
The
Okay.
last one.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Go ahead, Carlos, please.
Because for me, is that the level of technological development to extract or exploit the oil is that high that the level of fuel use is such that the world economy is based in non-renewable source of energy. So if I consider this as a true, so do you think that in the near future the market competition among non-renewable resource use of energy, it would be as same as the renewable resource source of energy? So I mean the normal consumer, it will have the same choice to choose between non-renewable and renewable source of energy.
I think that's the way it needs to be, if I can put it that way. But then you have to work back, and you're confronted with if we take electricity generation as a subset of your question. So, will it be biomass? Will it be gas plus carbon capture and storage? Because I don't think long term it can be gas without carbon capture and storage. Will it be solar or will it be wind? And to some degree, the consumer's buying the electricity and will buy the cheaper electricity. So you have to work back through the system and say, how do we make the private sector work in these circumstances? And that's where I think there is a complication, because now you've got to manage the grid. And some of these technologies, you can say, I want to turn it up because there's a sudden surge in demand. And I want to turn it down because demand has gone down. And you can do that with some technologies and not other technologies.
Right.
And I'm seeing this happening in the United Kingdom. As the renewable energy is going in there, the capacity factors, you see in Germany, of gas are going down, and people say, I'm not going to build another gas plant because I don't get to run my gas plant fully. Sure. So you're now not getting the investment. So the risk is in the United Kingdom, we don't have enough capacity ultimately, because we're not supporting renewables and we're frightening the gas. So I think we probably need to consider a different way of doing it, which is that we need to create an institution that is the agent of the consumer and goes out and says, I need to balance the grid. I think I have this set of technologies available. I'm going to invite, as has been done, the private sector to bid in to give me the lowest cost of these sets of technologies.
There's a shift of technology.
Yes, yes. So you're still using the private sector, but there's a state institution that's making the decisions about what to buy on behalf of the consumer. And what you're saying is, I know if you're building the gas plant now that you won't be able to run it at the same capacity as you did before because I'll have wind and solar on the system. But I will promise you a decent return. So it's like they have in the United States, a utility return. If you run your plant properly, that's your responsibility. If you can build your plant and run it properly, I'll make sure you get a decent return. And by the way, I'll stop you getting a very high return. So if there's a sudden shortage and you put your prices up, you're not going to profit out of any of that. Or if we bring in a new regulation that gives you an unfair advantage, you won't get profit out of that as well. So I'll stop you getting super profits, but at the same time, if you make the investment and run your plant properly, I'll enable you to get a return on capital. And you say that in the sense to each of the people, and you ask them to bid against each other, essentially to minimize the return on capital that they want. And the more things mature, the more you're able to say that you've got technology-specific competitions, but ultimately you've got technology-agnostic competitions. Although you're still going to have to bid in for certain technologies to make sure that you can balance the grid overall. And I think that's the best way of giving the consumer the choice that we want. One of the complications is the consumer may say, yeah, but I can just buy solar panels and put them on my roof. You're not telling me I can't do that, are you? And in the United Kingdom, for example, yes, of course, you can do that. One of the things that we've got to recognize, the complication is that consumer still needs the grid, because there will be times the sun's not shining, and they still need the capacity that's there to bring the electricity in. So you've got to make sure that, in a sense, the economic proposition is a valid one. So when you put solar panels on your roof, the risk is, depending on how you pay for your electricity, you're now not paying your fair share of the grid. So, and there's a big debate going on in the United States about this. I don't know if you know, raging arguments in California, Arizona, and elsewhere about are people, are we now sharing the cost of the grid properly? So if you can, I think it's fair that the consumer faces the proper cost of their decisions, although there can be a lot of argument about what the fair cost is. I'm not suggesting it's simple, but I think it's a case of using the private sector and creating the right institutions to use competition among the generators to get the best low carbon cost outcome.
Ok, muchas gracias. ¿No hay ninguna otra pregunta? Pues muchísimas gracias. Thank you very much. I'm sorry.
Pleasure.
Thank you.